Okay. I just want to see that clock behind there. There's light there.
Otherwise, I won't.
You'll tell me. Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in your midst. As church leaders, as scholars, as students, thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to be here. And for me personally, thank you, Marie, I bring greetings from wherever you went, Uganda and Kenya, and Philip, and then I don't know, yes, Philip is here. Who else has been part of this team? Thank you very much, and to the team from Bread for the World who have worked with us. Hannes is still in the room? No, he's not here. Okay, I just want to focus on this whole thing about AICs, ecology and livelihoods. Too many words around us. There are key words here. There are more than three. In fact, I had written 3 words, but later the list went down. AICs, ecology, livelihoods, development, poverty, cosmology, people, all those have been going on as I've been speaking. We've been discussing. And even as I was reflecting on this. Let me just talk about the Organization of African Instituted Churches. It's a fellowship of African independent churches founded in 1978. The vision is the people of Africa, transformed by the good news of Jesus Christ, blessed by the Spirit of God, building on their cultures, living abundant life in community for their children and the world. So there is sustainability there. When you talk about children, it's about intergenerational. And sustainability, we talk about utilizing or consuming or working with the resources today with the future generations in mind. The mission of the OIC is to bring together African independent churches and to equip them and to enable them to preach the good news of Jesus Christ in word and deed. We say word, the proclamation itself, but deed, engaging with the realities of the world we live in. Why should we care about ecology and sustainability? It's an issue of stewardship of creation on which the people who have been left behind largely rely on for their livelihood. So let me first of all I would like to look at ecology and livelihoods in relation to those who have been left behind. 80% of the people in extreme poverty live in rural areas. This is globally. And a majority of them under the age of 18. This is according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, quoting the World Bank. 55% of the people in extreme poverty are in sub-Saharan Africa, and still a majority live in rural areas. When considering moderate poverty, 46% of the rural population globally is poor. These people largely rely on land and other environmental resources for their livelihoods. There is a link between the livelihoods of the people who are being left behind in the current economic progress and natural resources. If there is no ecological harmony, the people most affected by poverty will suffer more. AICs and ecology. What resources do we draw on since we are linking AICs to ecology and livelihoods? It starts with the founding visions of the African independent churches. Which are a resource for engagement for integral human flourishing. I think we've been talking about human flourishing without talking about integral. Because human flourishing, we can look at Western countries, we can say you are flourishing. You've reduced poverty, almost eliminated it, although it is there. But human flourishing without looking at the rest of creation is a dangerous thing itself. Theologies and belief systems that relate to the environment. 1. Holding worship services under trees. Forests as retreat points, spaces, places, or for spiritual renewal and engagement. Here, some of the AICs, their spirituality relates to creation, not concrete. There are AICs who will never hold a service in a concrete room. It will be under a tree. It will be in a forest. Or it will be on a mountain. That is a direct relation to ecology. Planting seasons, harvest seasons are seasons for sharing. Seasons of plenty and lean seasons are seasons for sharing. Water is a resource utilized symbolically for spiritual renewal, deliverance, and protection. A spirituality that relates to natural resources. An intergenerational approach to life, sustainability, and that is the value for future generations. You ask a simple person from African independent churches that, do you know sustainability? They will say no. Do you look at life in an intergenerational, cohesive manner? Yes. So they don't need to know SDGs for them to know that they are working for sustainability. So recently we were in a meeting and one young man was asking, it was an interfaith meeting on sustainable development goals, saying, sustainable development goals, how do I look at them? What do I tell my grandmother? I said, your grandmother doesn't need to know the 17 SDGs. First of all, they were not designed by her and not for her. Yet they are important to us. What she needs to know is that her granddaughter will not die giving birth. When we talk about gender equality, when we talk about health for all, she'll need to know that her grandchildren will not die young. Those are sustainable development goals, the language that we need to work with. Back to ecology. Valuing creation as a source for livelihood, as food, medicine, and recreation. Affirming the place of indigenous knowledge. Deliverance and renewal of creation. I'll get back to that later. Continuously questioning development and its impact on the community. AICs were born in argument with the Western modes of development. We need to remember that. And that's why they were called backward. They were saying, what you are doing breaks community. What you are doing destroys the environment. In fact, there are some African independent churches, especially in the western part of Kenya, at the time of their founding, they never took money to church. And they never made collections in church. If you went to church, you left money in your shoes outside, you went to church, got back to your shoes as a man, as a woman, and picked your money and went home, because money was considered to be evil. Money was what was used to push people out of their communities to go and work on commercial farms established by the colonial farmers. So it got the male members of the families out of their communities, out of their families and communities. It was the first time people were being moved from their families to be taken hundreds of kilometers away. They were not forced to work, but there was a personal tax that was imposed to be paid using money. That's how money was introduced, somehow. It was not simply for purchasing and selling, but it was also for paying tax to the colonial government, and you had to move out of your community. So there was a spirituality that developed, that something that breaks family is evil and you don't take it to church. That's a background. So there was the AICs, there's a section that continuously question the development, and up to today, some of them, we don't engage with them talking about development. That is out. It doesn't mean that they don't want to go to hospital. It doesn't mean that they don't want to educate children, but they look at development, some of them still look at development as a Western concept which is in place to transform Africans into Europeans. The role of the OAIC in looking at in looking at ecology and livelihoods. One, engagement for deepened social consciousness. This means working towards a common understanding of wholeness. We've realized that when we talk about development as wholeness, it clicks. We talk because we are talking about wholeness of communities. We are talking about people relating to the rest of creation. So that is the area we've been able to work with to deepen a conversation, not simply environmental protection, but wholeness. The factors that lead to a life of dignity and the factors that deny people a life of dignity. That brings us in the conversations on development. Then stories of communities in relation to the changes in time. Different generations bring their stories and how they have related to the environment over a period. In one community, we were working with the churches, and we help people break into different groups, as young men, as young women, as older women, as young women, as older men, and young men. And we said, look at your environment over the period you can remember. It's interesting, there are those who went back to the 1940s, and they drew it. They started looking at the forest cover, they started looking at the water streams, they started looking at tree coverage, and by the time they were sharing, it was the older generation that brought a clearer picture of what had changed. Yet they themselves also had not been interacting with that reality as older people in relation to environmental destruction. That's what we are talking about, deepening social consciousness. Using evidence, that is data, to interact with the stories. Then we bring the data. How much forest cover is going? What is the destruction of wetlands doing to the community? An interlude. If I was working with African independent churches, now we should be drumming and dancing a bit. Yeah. So let me bring this. In one community, we went out. I remember it was the year 2000 when I was still leading the development program. And there are people who had been mobilized massively, and they said, since we've gone through training over a period, not training, engagement, we don't want to use the word training, let's give out certificates. They asked for certificates. We said, okay. And about 500 people, it was a festival in a community who had been trained from a coverage of about 5 square, a radius of 5 kilometers. As we were rejoicing and then we were giving the facilitators bicycles, a women group who were not prepared at all to come and sing, we were celebrating development. So before we gave away the bicycles, they said we want to sing a song. And the song in the local dialect went like this. Let us learn development. Can you imagine? They are saying learn with suspicion. But let us not forget to teach our children to cook. Let us not forget to eat together. Let us not forget to greet each other. That is suspicion of development, and it became a resource for us. It seems as if they were dismantling what we had done in 5 months. They felt we were not conscious that development breaks up communities, and for them, they sang, and that song was in the local dialect. They sang, they stopped, they went away. They were suspicious of us. These were not church people. It was a community group. So for looking at development, ecology, and livelihoods, what we want to say is we have to hear. We don't simply have to read. We don't simply have to look at data that is coming from the UN and other agencies. That is an interlude. I should have come with a drum so that we drum that one. And there was no dancing when, interestingly, in Africa, when you drum, you dance. But that one they drummed and they didn't dance. These were rural women. So, which means there is deep consciousness which we have to work with if we are going to deal with ecological issues. There is knowledge, there is understanding, there is consciousness out there that we have to deal with. And for us, that is a resource. The impact of the engagement we've been working with, what comes out of it, is the recovering of resources for climate resilience and ecological harmony. One, we are beginning to hear ecological narratives in relation to agriculture and the earth. Surprisingly, when we go, we don't give people what to say. We deal with the realities. And the older generations and the younger generations start drawing back on the resources they have in themselves. Interestingly, we realize that even cows and goats are named in many communities. Sometimes we simply say livestock, but for them, they are named. They are not simply things. The way they relate to plants, the way they relate to soil, the way they relate to the rest of nature, to rivers, to forests, is different from the way we talk about it from the development narrative. So that is beginning to come through. Indigenous foods. Those from West Africa value yams. In the Central East African part of it, that had disappeared. When we talk about climate resilience, when we talk about ecological harmony, people pick up what was lost and bring it back. And interestingly, some of it is being driven from the churches. The processing of local vegetables. I remember going to South Africa. I've been to South Africa. I've been to Botswana, several countries. It was surprising when I enter supermarkets and I find spinach, I find cabbages, and I find in East Africa, a white person is Muzungu. So, coming from East Africa, I found Muzungu vegetables. And I said, how are they going to deal with climate change? With spinach, if they don't recover the indigenous vegetables. And my colleagues in South Africa, most likely we can look at that, because the supermarket has introduced something different from what people know and what people had always lived on. Indigenous trees. We listened to one of the facilitators in the community, a church person. He said they have 200,000 seedlings. But now, 1/4 of that, 25%, are seedlings, tree seedlings of indigenous trees. And asking him, why? He said people can easily cut eucalyptus, they can easily cut and sell pine, but they respect the indigenous trees more. He used the word respect. So that means that is a relation to environment that is unique, and yet it's not unique. It has to be recovered. Conversations on soil health. We are beginning to hear people talk about soil health and the value for organic matter in soil conservation. The gender dimension. Who destroys what? The women are saying we are not the destroyers of trees, and we are the ones who are being mobilized to plant trees. They said, we look for branches to cook. The men cut the trees and burn charcoal and bricks. And they said, go to the men to plant the trees, instead of telling women to plant trees. The gender dimension comes to the surface. Seed selection and building seed banks. It's going back to the moral economy, the value for sharing from the harvest, the economy of reciprocity. If we are going to care for the earth, we will need to get away from what introduces, what destroys the earth. Right now, a German company buyer, they have bought Monsanto, and they are buying seed companies in Africa. Right now there is a legislation in almost every country in East Africa to adopt genetically modified food crops or crops. Recently, there was an article in the Daily Nation that if you'll be caught having planted the traditional seeds near, if you don't do it 5 kilometers away from where they are organically genetified, those what do you call GMOs? GMO. Yeah, GMO, you will be fined 1 million shillings. That is $10,000. And the buyer is part of that. That has to be stopped. Because it takes away the moral economy where people sharing seeds is part of community values. It's part of growing the harvest. Impact of engagement. We are talking about eco-rooted narratives. These are young women from West Pokot, a pastoralist area. They are holding sorghum. A bishop, Right Reverend, was talking about sorghum. They've started growing sorghum. It's resilient, but also it's more nutritious. Impact of engagement with the community. We are seeing covenants coming up. In one community, there is a man who refused to build a kitchen. I think the rural communities are different because we've been introduced with bringing the kitchen inside the house. The kitchen is supposed to be out there. And surprisingly, that is a space largely for women. And that's where they sit and have conversations. That's where they sit and cook and they use hearts. But in my own culture, it's the responsibility still of the man to build that kitchen. So in one community where training had been going on, this man was left leaving this kitchen to collapse. And they realized that if there is a strong wind, it can collapse on the woman and the children. So men who had been part of the training came together and formed a committee because they had talked to him and he had refused to come for training. They went to him and said, unless you construct this kitchen house, you're not going to be part of the men's conversations. Interestingly, if you are excluded like that, then it means you are irrelevant. He built the kitchen. The woman later picked a very healthy cockerel and took it to the trainers and said, thank you. But it was the community that did it. Covenants for responding to some of the issues that affect the community. I want to run through. Action to extend gender barriers. We've been looking at environment, we've been looking at food security, but at the same time, we are realizing in an area where the women are supposed not to have livestock in a pastoralist area, now they are beginning to do that. This is a woman leader. I'm leading a women's organization that is focusing on rearing bulls. We buy the bulls, grow them, and then sell them. We sell the bulls and save the money on a collective account. We share the money among the members of the group who use it for investment and dealing with day-to-day needs. In this pastoralist community, women are not supposed to have livestock. But that is a transformation, that women are gradually extending these barriers for their own empowerment. And interestingly, the church in the area has taken it up, an indigenous church. I talked to the apostle, the leader of this church, and pointed to this young woman and said, she's Mama Maendeleo, which means Madam Development. That is extending the barriers. I would like to run through and end. Orality at the center, moving beyond training manuals to demonstration farms. From training manuals to demonstration farms, that has been a process. This has led to the recovery of the oral resources. And it is knowledge sharing. It's a conversation on food, the soil, the trees, water, seeds, harvest, school fees for children, health care, social accountability. It is the recovery or renewal or transformation of broken relationships in the community, but also between the citizenry and the policymakers, between the people and the rest of creation. This is a woman leader. Now her husband relies on her. we would say she's richer than him. He spent his time in gambling. She spent her time participating in empowerment processes. And she has high respect in the community. She's a leader. She's not a political leader, a woman mobilizer, a community mobilizer. And this cow means, one, provision of milk for food, provision of milk for family income, and provision of manure. That's what it means for fertilizer. I should have looked at this data quickly as an interlude. What does church growth mean in Africa and the livelihoods of the people? The church is growing at fastest in Africa, but you look at the data, as I point to it, in Burundi, about maternal mortality per 100,000 is 712. In Cuba, it is 39 in a communist country. In Finland, it is 3 out of 100,000. They don't need to go to church not to die, and those who go to church die. That's the question for us. The theology of God, we've brought back this woman whom you've called, God has given and has taken away. We have to transform it. The theology that accepts hunger, early deaths, child deaths as the normal has to be transformed. And we most likely have to say as ministers, God, we bring back this person, and it's our responsibility which we didn't fulfill. And this woman is back to you earlier than she was supposed to come back. Because God is not the business of calling African women and children before their time. Doesn't God love the Finland women who don't die giving birth? That's a question for us Africans. Transforming theology. Hunger and poverty are ending today. There will be no hunger in this village. This is a pastor. We are moving towards liberative narratives. This pastor doesn't know goal number 2, ending hunger. But his spirituality tells him hunger is evil and it must end. And he looks at his responsibility in mobilizing. Interestingly, he has built a community structure, and it is chaired by even a Muslim who are mobilizing. They've reached over 500 households, which are transforming from poverty to abundance. In the OAIC, we are also looking at transforming theology. We used to talk about growing the harvest as a theme, but we realize that if we say growing the harvest, we put the responsibility on the poor. If we talk about redeeming the harvest, we change the theology and we handle the structural issues. Because the harvest, the people in hunger don't want to be in hunger, but the harvest is held up by many structural issues, and the harvest has to be redeemed. And we are developing a theology around that. Recovery of the prophetic voice. The AICs were born prophetic, but we become pastoral with the time, caring, supporting, healing. Yet, as he said to the colonial governments, we said, you are okay to be here, but you are not supposed to be here as people who dominate others spiritually, politically, and economically. How comes we haven't done enough of that with our own African government? So we are saying this kind of situation calls for an assertive prophetic process that will uproot the structures that propagate poverty. This prophetic response should touch every structure that is undermining the dignity of humanity and all creation. We realize that unless we are prophetic, we will care until almost everybody dies while we are caring. We have to challenge what causes death. We have to dismantle the foundations of poverty. We have to dismantle the foundations and the values on which wanton destruction of the environment is built, and that is greed in the north, in the south, in the family, globally. We have to dismantle that. Conclusion. It is visions, not a vision. We look, this picture is the organization of African student churches. Can you imagine, we were participating in the World Social Forum. This could be looked at as extreme left process, because this was the forum that came up to say, okay, instead of going looking for the World Bank wherever they are meeting and we fight with them, why don't we come up with a constructive process? So this time it was held in Nairobi in 2007. And the person in that clerical shirt is the international chairman of the OAIC. Together with women leaders on the streets of Nairobi during the World Social Forum, saying we have visions for a better world, not a vision. Because it's those grand visions for a better world which seem to subjugate everybody. As the OAIC, we are saying there are resources in the founding visions of the AICs. These are resources that are released when the AICs accept to recover, articulate, and update the founding visions. Every generation dreams, and the future is in going back to Joel. I will pour my spirit on all people, and your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your men shall see visions. Even your maid servants will, on men and women, I'll pour out my spirit in those days. This democratizes it. The spirit is for men, is for women, is for young people, for young men, and for young women. If we are going to look at a future where there is ecological harmony, where all are well, not a few, then we need to respond fully to what the Spirit of God is doing. We are realizing that we were born in the power of the Holy Spirit during difficult times. These are difficult times again. We need to allow the Spirit of God again to work in us, and we confront and engage this reality for the abundance of life for all. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you also for keeping the time so that there are still enough, and there are already 2 questions. Okay, Juliana, and then please.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing this up and this really inspiring talk. I have 2 very, very short questions, if I may. The first would be, how far do you think the issue of climate change and the environment is spread in the minds? Like, do you think that many people are aware? Is it an issue in people's minds and lives as far as you experience it? And second would be, you mentioned that AICs, for example, gather in open spaces, and that there is a different connection that could be used as a resource to nature to combat climate change, maybe. And we all know that theology has to be contextual. So my question would be, how would you connect this to a specific, then maybe eco-theology, if there is such thing, in AICs?
Thank you. Should I take all? Or I answer that one first? What should be the order? Should I go ahead? Or?
What is easier for you? Would you like to take the other one with it? Or there are already 2 questions. Maybe you go for that, because
I go for this one.
2 questions, and then we may take the next
one,
or how many questions may come up from Thomas.
Climate change, the awareness, I can say it is still low. We need to work much more on it. It doesn't mean that people don't understand the impact. People understand the impact and they know that climate has changed. But we need to deepen the understanding of the causes. I think that's where it is. People understand climate change. They know. When we get out there, they narrate the changes. They talk about it. It's in their day-to-day narrative. They say it used to rain by this month. It's raining in another month altogether. It used to be hot in this month. It is time for drying our food crops. But now it is raining. The knowledge is there. But the causes and where the responsibility is where the challenge is. Politicians sometimes say, climate is changing, plant trees. That's what you hear. And that's why women are beginning to say, we are not the ones who cut the trees. Go to those who cut the trees so that they can plant them. So it's narrowed down to tree planting many times. There are policies in different countries. For example, some of the people we are working with, we said, can you get out and go to the district office? We didn't tell them what policy is there. We say, get out and go and talk to the government department, the district environment office, and ask them about this. They say, the environment office said, oh yes, thank you for coming. You help us to spread the information. And they said, who is supposed to spread it? So those gaps are there. The knowledge is there, but the deepening of the causes and what the responses should be, because most of the responses being propagated are what people are supposed to do directly rather than what is structured that is supposed to change both in the African countries and in the North. 2, AICs, yeah, certainly. But I'm not saying that all AICs are like that, to pray under trees. There are some who are still doing that, and they give us a resource for that. Certainly that is eco-theology, or maybe eco-spirituality. They will not call it a theology. It's spirituality. They don't talk so much about theology, but in terms of that, it's more of spirituality that relates to ecology. Yeah.
Okay. Thomas?
Thank you very much, Nicta, for your presentation and for your new insights. First of all, I feel remembered when you were telling about the relation and that at farms the animals, the livestock has names. That remembered me on my grandparents doing farming, where the cows and the pigs had names as well. So it seems that we are not too far away from each other, but this attitude might have been preserved better in Africa and in AICs like in Germany, where Bayer is a German company commercializing life, which we definitely have to stop. This is the first. And the second is what I want you to help me, to give me, because I need it from you, is that theology of you have transformed. I tried to make some notes. I know that your theology is mostly oral and the founding visions, but I really want to learn more and to pass it on to my pastor colleagues to raise awareness with that indigenous knowledge and wisdom, where we can learn and want to learn from you. So please, I ask you to help me with that.
Okay. Yeah, the other was a comment. How do we go? Memory. I think all of us need to do that. Let's run back to what we own, even if we are no longer, some of us, like where we are, is no longer rural. Interestingly, one of the independent churches do, you can recover that. It doesn't mean that everybody will keep a cow in German. But what independent churches do, I don't know whether Professor Maura, who has done very good research, and we are thankful to you, is that they try to impose rural spirituality on urban populations. The way communities build, the structures and all that, they bring it to them in the way communities built to urban areas. So even all of us, can we recover from the past what is usable? It doesn't mean that we want to go and live in the past, but what resources have we been dropping? It may not be naming cows and all that, because I see a movement of young people in Europe who have risen up and they've taken up the whole issue of climate change. The issue we are beginning to document, we want to start documenting these processes and narratives in the local languages. so that they are a resource in the local languages, and then we translate that. So we want to work with younger theologians. Most likely we need to bring agronomists, environmentalists on board, sociologists, and we work on documenting this. We want, first of all, to preserve it in the local languages so that it becomes a documented resource to them. Then we benefit from it, so that it's not simply extractive. Certainly, keep us accountable on that. We want to do that. How we share that, we want to work on that. There is already, out of working on livelihoods, that is in place. Whenever you talk to people, it just pops up. And they don't know that they are helping you. They keep just talking in the local languages, and you realize they have it. So the issue is to slow down, and that's why we've said, take away the manual. Because the manual, the training manual, it is important, but it brings elitism. Anybody who can't work with the manual is left out. So we realize that it's liberated, especially the rural women, who many of them haven't gone beyond basic primary education. It doesn't mean that all are in that category. And even those who are considered to be illiterate, they just get it, put it in the soil, and they bring people to their farm on the soil, and they say, this is how it is done. So we want to pick those narratives, and because they are not holding a manual, they have the liberty to use their narrative and to pick their resources and use them. But yet we have basic guidelines. We will do that. Yes, to move to another one?
No, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to hear a little more because you mentioned Bayer Monsanto. This time I don't want to introduce myself as someone who's studying in Humboldt University. I'm someone who's also working in intersectional research, and I have a background in textile industry, so especially dealing with the Bayer Monsanto, and I'm very much engaged with the Bayer Monsanto thing here in Germany, and I claim actually that you probably in Africa know more about Bayer Monsanto stories than we do here, because if you ask people here in Germany, they don't know what they do. And especially here on this university, we are heavily funded on the chemistry and biological side by Bayer, because they are really good employee. So I wonder, because you said taking up the menu, I'm asking, like, I see what AIC is doing in Africa is something here secular NGOs and governments are doing, somewhere where the church has not the same influence as the church has influence in Africa. So I wonder, like this narrative, you have a certain kind of power because you're the one moving the masses. So I wonder, like especially on the Bayer Monsanto, how can you help us here in like even like 10 of the 10 biggest chemistry industries are German. And why are we not aware in Germany of that? Because we don't have someone who says like, hey, you exploiting my like I don't have water anymore because you buy the bottled water from South Africa and Germany. So we in Germany don't get that because we just have the advertising of saying, oh, drink this water, it's the finest water. And you have a good life by drinking that water. And your kid will be healthy because you drink the water from South Africa from the spring, not from a dirty river in Germany. So I wonder, like, what can you do of helping us to understand this? So
I think that's where the whole issue of cooperation for development comes in. We can engage our governments, like this is something not simply, it would be another issue altogether for a company to come and they say we can also sell these seeds. We don't accept it, but at the same time they've come to the market. But when there is legislation moving countries where 70% are small scale farmers who have been relying, as you saw, those women holding their sorghum seeds, that they plant, they do said, by the way, they have even seed selection processes that are excellent, that they can multiply the seed, that now that is going to stop that every season, twice a year, you have to go somewhere else and buy seed to plant. That's what is changing. And that requires partnership and conversations. We agree. We can have a voice in the South, you have a voice in the North. The question, that's where, with bread for the world, I think that's where we can link and work together with agencies in the north. Yes, you are still raising your hand. I seem you haven't answered well.
Don't you underestimate yourself? Don't you have a voice talking to the chemisticians more than we do in the north? Because I wonder, you don't need bread for the world to talk to them. You actually can talk to them because they're in your country. And I don't know, like if the biomass comes to you, don't you, because you're AACC, so don't you, can't you emphasize, maybe become independent from this? Don't cut out the menu, cut out the menu at all. Don't talk to them because they have nothing to do with this business. It's not a German business. It's a business, German business made in Africa. So it's African business. It's an African resource. If you believe in
I agree. It's deepening the awareness, but the whole thing is that by the time people realize, people don't follow legislation in Africa, even if they don't want something. It gets to Parliament, and you realize it's an advanced stage, so we have to work more. We have a responsibility. But we also would like to hear more of the citizens, not simply churches, of these countries, to say, stop this evil of economic domination. Stop suppressing others. You can't keep doing it. We want to hear the citizens also from these countries speaking to that clearly. Yeah. Another one? It seems our time is almost there. There was another hand.
Was there? I didn't see another hand. If somebody raised his or her hand.
That's fine. This one is finished.
All right. Then in this case, thank you very much.